Hello, today I'm going to be talking about Watchmen by Alan Moore. This book I originally read in an English class last semester, which most people wouldn't expect to be reading like a graphic novel or a comic book in an English class in high school. But I really feel like this story in particular is a testament to how broad and all-encompassing, like what the comic genre is truly capable of. And there's a reason this is considered, I think, by many comic lovers to be a bit of a masterpiece. And I think it does stand up to that name. So Watchmen is this deeply complex story. It's quite long, too. You have multiple characters. You're jumping between timelines and perspectives. It is published in 1987, and the backdrop of the Cold War is very integral to the plot and the general vibes of the story. It is so complex. Honestly, it is a little bit hard to read in a good way, I think. Most people think that you can just flip through a comic and it's something that you maybe enjoy passively, or it's just like candy versus like real writing or whatever. This is a book you need to read it like it's a written novel. You need to analyze it. And it is chock full of details and allusions and symbols. If you blink, you'll miss it. And for that reason, I really enjoyed reading it because I didn't understand it immediately. It took a lot of work to get into it. And I think that's on purpose because there are so many mysteries throughout this story, and you really get that feeling. Like you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the answers are as the reader, which I think is really good writing. So chapter 1 opens with this beautiful visual of this smiley face covered in blood, which is going to be a repeating symbol throughout the story. Because we're plopped into this world. It is set in America, where the comedian, a vigilante, I won't use the word superhero, has just been murdered. He's been thrown out of the window of his apartment. We are also introduced to the shadowy figure of Rorschach here, who sort of appears as like a film noir detective, which I thought was a very interesting aesthetic choice. And he's trying to solve the mystery of the comedian's death. I will not do a step-by-step walkthrough of the plot because I think that would take a lot more preparation, an entirely different video, because like I said, it is so complex. But we discover that in this world, superheroes, in the way that we come to know them as having supernatural abilities, don't exist. But there are superheroes in the sense that there are people who dress up in costumes and fight crime, or are sort of commissioned by the government to do their bidding. Watchmen asks the question, what would happen if superheroes existed in our actual real world? And that is a really interesting question, and Watchmen has to offer some pretty horrifying answers. These people are not good people. They don't necessarily agree with what Spider-Man might say about great power comes with great responsibility, because they don't really live up to that. And the comedian in particular is an especially horrible person. Like, Watchmen makes it incredibly clear. Like, the comedian is a terrible human being through and through. He kills indiscriminately. He seems to enjoy violence. And later on at a point, he and another superhero character, Dr. Manhattan, actually the only character here with actual supernatural abilities, are sent to Vietnam by the US government. And in this story, America wins the Vietnam War because of Dr. Manhattan, this hugely powerful character. And in Vietnam, the comedian gets a Vietnamese woman pregnant, and after the war ends, she asks him, like, well, what's going to happen now? Like, how are you going to take care of me? What's going to happen? And he actually shoots her point blank. That is a level of violence and emotional disregard that I don't think we are used to seeing from our superheroes in comics. That's definitely out of the norm. This world is a little bit perverse, a little bit disgusting, but it's also very much rooted in reality, in our reality. And when I think about the fact that this was published in 1987, I do think about the very real world backdrop that this is set in and what was on the minds of readers and Alan Moore when he was creating this. And I think that absolutely is translated. That being said, it doesn't feel stuck in time. Yes, the Cold War is a hugely important backdrop. They're constantly talking about Russia invading and nuclear power, but it doesn't date it. it still feels relevant. Something else really interesting about the format of this story is that you'll have each chapter is interspersed with these like almost letter pages they remind me of in like traditional short form comics, but these pages are part of the story. And it might be tempting to skip all this text because a couple pages of this, you should not. These are so rich, they add to the story. It'll be like part of a character's memoir who was in this like superhero team, or it'll be like police detective files. I like that it changes every time because it feels like you're uncovering more of the mystery. And you learn more background details in these little like interspersed textual bits. These really help you sort of crack that code. We're introduced to a lot of other characters at the comedian's funeral. A lot of the people that he used to fight crime with. So here, the glowing blue guy is Dr. Manhattan. He gets his powers because of a mistake that happens when they're studying like nuclear power in a lab. So once again, relating to warfare and the Cold War in particular, and that's how he gets his powers. And I think that's important to note that he is the only person in this story who actually has powers that are of a supernatural origin. We are introduced to Lori, who is the daughter of a woman who was in the superhero team. And I will do the spoilers now. The comedian had unconsensual relations with Lori's mother, and Lori is his daughter. She doesn't discover this until much farther into the story, but it really just adds to the character of the comedian. He dies right at the beginning, but he haunts the entire narrative in more ways than one, and he is sort of the catalyst for this idea of someone's trying to get rid of these superheroes, and these like they're all retired now, except for Rorschach, because he's kind of weird and he's doing his own thing. That being said, we have maybe one glimpse of humanity into the comedian. This is the really horrific scene that I was talking about earlier in Vietnam when he shoots the woman. Most importantly, Dr. Manhattan is a bystander to all of this. He has all the power in the world to stop it. He's the most powerful thing in the universe, actually, but he stands by and watches, and I will go much deeper into his character in a moment. But that moment that we get insight into the comedian is he breaks into the house of this former villain. He's very mentally unwell. He's ranting, he's raving, he's saying things that don't make sense. Rorschach finds this out because he goes to, like, brutally interrogate this villain because he wants to discover who's killed comedian. He thinks it might be the villain, it wasn't, but he gets this information. Rorschach is, again, a morally great character. Nobody in this book is a moral paragon. That is really important. Once again, it's rooted in reality. This scene in particular. Alan Moore does a lot of these like small little bits rather than like larger panels. He keeps that somewhat uniform. He does like to have like these 2-page panels where it's just like a 9 square grid. And I can't find the exact bit. Here I find it. So the comedian, Rorschach is talking about the comedian, and he talks about this joke. Man goes to doctor, says he's depressed, says life feels harsh and cruel, says he feels all alone in a threatening world, where what lies ahead is vague and uncertain. Doctor says, treatment is simple. Great clown Pagliacci is in town tonight. Go and see him. That should pick you up. Man bursts into tears, says, but doctor, I am Pagliacci. Rorschach talks in this weird way where he kind of omits important words, like the and or He's a weird character. But this entire mystery for me when I was reading this is, why is the comedian called the comedian? Nothing he does is funny. It's brutal. It's really sad. It's disturbing. It's jarring. A lot of the stuff that you witness him do in this story makes you cringe because it's objectively horrible things to do. But he does talk about being in on this joke. He never clarifies what that joke is. But you have to wonder, He's sent to Vietnam. He does objectively horrible things there. Objectively horrible things to win that war. He says, yeah, well, that's just the joke, you know? And if there's this great joke in the world, like, you have to be in on it. And him participating in this violence and in this cruelty of the world seems to be his way of being in on that joke or trying to survive it. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, he is this clown character, even though nothing he does is funny. There's a lot of that almost inherent pessimism in this novel, I will say. It's dark, it's not happy, and because of that, it does feel really real. Alan Moore also employs this technique where he'll layer different forms of narration on top of each other, which only adds, I think, to how occluded the story is, but I think it's a good effect. There's this newsstand that appears a couple times, and that makes sense because global events are a huge important backdrop of this story. And there's a character who's sitting outside of the newsstand reading a comic book called Black Fright, and it's about this, like, pirate who's coming home. It seems unrelated to the story. And you'll have these moments where the actual, like, dialogue in the real world is overlaid with this stuff. Those papyrus schools, which are narration from the pirate comic book. And it is about, like, a pirate and what he's doing, but also some of these narration points that are pointed out are very purposeful. Like, they're talking about, oh, you know, Russia might invade, we might not be alive tomorrow, you know, like, they're setting up a nuclear shelter in the background, like, it could all be over. And then you have the narration from the pirate comic, which are like, I thought of my family, vulnerable, unsuspecting, never dreaming that damnation bore down upon them, sails pregnant with the pirate wind, a necklace of heads about its prow. Crazed with helplessness, I cursed God and wept, wondering if he wept also. But then, what use his tears if his help was denied me? I did struggle a little bit with understanding the purpose of, like, inserting this other comic story within a comic story, which is quite meta, because that, like, palimpsest, that layering, is confusing. And initially I got frustrated because it appears a lot throughout the story. It's not just this one section. But I think that there is this point Alan Moore is making about art reflecting life, or life reflecting art. Because just like this character is in this world reading this comic book, I am in this world reading this comic book. And it is an incredibly meta moment. And the whole point of this is what would happen if our real world had these superheroes that we glorify and look up to so much. And I think that this text is deeply rooted in text-to-life illusion. And I think that is a really big part of the point. The title, Watchmen, they reference it at the beginning, on the inside sleeve, comes from this whole concept, who watches the Watchmen? That is, I think, the main guiding question of this novel. People with power, who watches them? Who regulates them? You know? Like, can we trust people to protect us just because they're inherently more powerful than us? Or just because we give them that power? Dr. Manhattan is the only person who inherently has powers in the story. The other superheroes are just sort of granted it. And I think about the people in our world who we bestow with that kind of power. And I wonder, who watches them? I have a lot more I could say about this. I think that was kind of the most important point about Watchmen. I recommend everybody read this, even if you think you're not into comics. I didn't think necessarily that I would be into a comic that is this long. It's heavy. It's a big hardback cover, but it is a masterpiece. I genuinely think it is. And it leaves me with a lot more questions about my own life than it does about the actual story.